Hi, this is Gary from Santa Maria. This is my final beta test on this video on audio quality and transcription. This will be one of the longest videos that I have posted. I have been experimenting with just how good the transcription of recorded audio is on YouTube. I've tried Google Voice Mail. I've tried the T-Mobile replay, and now I'm going to go to a year 2000 old recording taken directly from cassette tape that I made. It's a half-hour interview that I did on a small Christian radio station in Santa Maria regarding the election. But it's the first that has a very tinny type quality to it, and I want to make sure that YouTube can transcribe it for the hearing impaired, even though the quality is rather poor. It'll be the final test, and I'll go to a little higher quality recordings from then on. I'm starting to get a whole hairball of loose ends that I need to take care of, so I'll take this opportunity to do so. I've been catching a lot of flack, mostly from trolls, uh, about my so-called diatribes and my rather busy graphics, you might say. The graphics are designed just to give people ideas. I'm throwing a lot in there, but I figure if you're going to be listening to me from anywhere from 7 minutes to, in this case, maybe up to 40 minutes, that you might as well have something interesting to look at. So these are just my ideas, just to give you ideas as to how you can do something similar. I'm not a real big video guy, obviously. I'm a radio guy. I don't particularly enjoy having my face on video, kind of an American Indian, Native American thing. I have no problem calling myself an American Indian, but the other American Indians don't like it. They want to be called Native Americans. So, but fortunately, when they give me grief, I've got the DNA results to prove that I've got just slightly over 15% both Seminole and Cherokee Indian, and my grandfather was a medicine man. But that aside, there I go digressing again. I can digress quicker than anyone else I know. But anyway, so back to my hairball of loose ends. I've also been catching a lot of grief for all the cowboy hats that I'm putting on people. The reason for that is very simple. It keeps the lawyers off my back. I'm claiming parity and education. And you would be surprised how quick these major corporations are to stick their lawyers on you if you even have a semblance of not doing a true parody. So all I have to do is stick different cowboy hats on people in Snagit. I'm using Snagit 12. They have Snagit 13 out now. Haven't used it yet. But when I do that, I'm obviously doing a parody, and that simply just keeps these what should I say, shark tank lawyers off my rear end. Uh, so I'm going to play that 2000 interview. It also will answer some of the heat that I've got about claiming to be a time traveler. Well, not a time traveler, maybe a remote viewer. And I think I have worked out a technique that allows me to, at least in a dream state, if not outwardly consciously, consulting with a future self, most people can't prove it. But since I've spent a lifetime in radio, going back at least 40 years now, a great deal of the things that I so-called, and I emphasize that, so-called prognosticated, um, have came true. The trouble with trying to get a psychic impression from the future, your impression can be right on the money, but the future is fluid. For instance, in this interview that I will play for you shortly, I had a very vivid impression of a cell phone doing electronic, or what I termed touch tone petition signing. Well, think back. In the year 2000, BlackBerry was the biggest, baddest cell phone on the market, and they had just incorporated email into the BlackBerry system. Smartphones wouldn't be around for another 7 years. So not having a frame of reference as to what a smartphone was, I spoke about it in the terms that were available to me in the year 2000. What I was seeing, at least in my mind's eye, were a deluge of smartphone usage to do electronic petition signing. But since the smartphone was 7 years from being invented at that time, the only thing I could relate it to was what was known at that time, and that was the BlackBerry. And since electronic full transactions had yet to be perfected by the email on the BlackBerry system, in my mind, the only way it could be accomplished was on touch-tone phones. Well, we all know what's happened since then. I can purchase stock. I can conduct a $1 million art transaction. I can put my electronic signature on anything in the world from my smartphone, except a political petition. God forbid if somebody passes around an electronic petition to smartphones to recall a judge or a politician or the other things that I will articulate in a minute. So anyway, just sit back, listen to what I had to say way back in the year 2000. Understand that I was trying to relate things that I was seeing in my mind's eye that have yet still to happen. And that's what I mean by a fluid future. I devoted 100% effort to getting that to happen. I even developed prototyping of the electronic vote counting mechanism that took microfilm and images of all of the votes with the help of Xerox Corporation, and I called in every favor that was ever owed to me for 20 years, and I did prototype the system for Senator Arlen Specter. Of course, it went nowhere. Utah passed a law to allow electronic petition signing, and the Utah legislature overturned it. All these politicians want to use social media to advertise and get you out to vote. Not a single darn one of them want to even think about your ability of putting yourself on an electronic signature. I botched that one on. Assigning your signature to an electronic petition that would carry the weight of law to recall these silly politicians that think their loyalty is to the major corporations and the other political entities dumping money into their pockets rather than the people that actually vote for them. God forbid that we have the ability of putting a signature on a smartphone and recalling a politician. All right, enough of my tirade again. I'm going to play that interview right now, and please comment and let me know what you think. Sorry, I always do things on one take. If I stumble over a few words, I apologize. I never use notes for reasons I've articulated before. Anyway, so here's the interview. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to a special broadcast once again of Christian Interviews today. I'm your host, Jim Zimmer. Normally what we talk about on Christian Interviews is we interview usually authors. We like to stick with prayer, revival, and marriages. Of course, those are my sacred things I like to talk about. But you know what's pretty interesting, folks, is this voter thing that's going on in Florida. It is so wild. There's a lot of prophetic utterances about it, and some things that are happening that if you look into the spiritual realm of it, you wonder if it's a spiritual battle, good against evil almost. There's just so many dynamics involved. There's a lot of revival happening in Florida, and it's so strange that this is the place that could pull out our president. And I was praying today that I'd like to come on the air with something fresh and new and something, you know, for the local ability. And if you'd like to be, our local population, if you'd like to be on Christian Interviews today, give us a call, 928-7707. We'll talk a little bit about it. But a man walked in just as I basically, to tell you the truth, folks, I was praying about it. And he walked in, and he is Gary Tomlinson. Gary Tomlinson used to work for the American Express Advantage Tech Group, which basically looked into fraud in American Express through signatures. He's basically one of those type of guys, believe me, you just look at this guy and you think computer, sorry Gary, computer geek. That's what you think. And he walked in, he says, is there anybody here who would like to talk about some of the voter stuff that's going on and a Christian point of view and what's really going on? Well, this man was given the opportunity to look into the voting record of the Dianne Feinstein and Michael, what was it, Gary?
Michael.
But he was, you were commissioned, now let me get that straight. Were you commissioned to do this, or you just had the opportunity that Governor Wilson said, okay, you're the guy, let's find out what's going on with the voting record in what county?
This was in Los Angeles County in 1994.
This was in 1994. Now, you said to me that you actually got to withhold the counting vote. I mean, you had a 3-day stay of counting. They couldn't count the vote until you completed your assessment. Is that true?
Yes, sir. If I would have had a little more preparation, I would have brought the 2 or 3 LA Times articles that I wasn't mentioned by name, just as a quote-unquote independent computer consultant that provided the data.
Now, you have an educational background at the University of Long Beach and the University of California at Irvine. Now, you don't have a graduate degree or a degree in computer science, is that correct?
No, sir, but I've taken graduate level work at both universities.
Okay, so we just don't want to, we don't want to fraudulently say that you're some kind of real big computer guy, but basically you are. I mean, you have a lot of background in it. You've also were on a committee with Ross Perot, right?
Yes, sir. The United We Stand people contracted with me to develop a system that would implement Mr. Perot's idea of the electronic town hall. And in essence, I had 4 meetings with Mr. Perot. And the bottom line of the last meeting, I told him that his idea of voting by telephone would and could not ever work, no matter what I tried. And I looked at every way feasible to guarantee your anonymity when you vote by phone. There is no way to guarantee your anonymity. Somebody is going to know where that call is coming from, and somebody's going to know what buttons you pressed. So the bottom line was, I told Mr. Perot that even though you couldn't actually vote by phone, the value in it would be digital petition signing, where you would vet out your registered voters by vetting out, sorry to use technical terms. Oh, and by the way, it's techno-nerd, not techno-geek.
Oh, okay, techno. Okay. Go ahead, Gary.
You vet out your voters. In other words, you have them prove that they are registered voters in that county and at that address. Then you assign them a PIN code. Now, I've got a way of a really tricky PIN code that's it is impossible to steal. I won't go into how that works. But then you would have to pick up the phone, listen to a recording of why this county supervisor should be recalled or why this initiative should be placed on the ballot. Then you would have to listen to the con position of why he shouldn't be recalled or why this initiative shouldn't go on the ballot. Once you were fully informed, you would be allowed to touch tone in your PIN code and electronically place your signature on an initiative and referendum. That would speed up the people's power in initiative and referendum gathering in the 22, 23 states that allow initiative and referendum, and actually give the people to outrun the molasses slow political bureaucracy that would try and thwart their will. So if you've got a mayor or a county commissioner that's really going against the will of the people, you know, you don't worry about people coming in and torpedoing your petition by filling it up with out-of-county voters or unregistered voters. You know, 1/3 of the signatures get thrown out once they check the validity of them. And I still think that that would hold great value and actually bring a little power back to the people if you were allowed just to pick up the phone and legally, that's the key, and I know how to do that too, legally place your name on an initiative and referendum.
Okay, now you looked into the voting, the California state voting in just one county. This was Los Angeles County. Is that correct?
Los Angeles County, and it's 4.2 million registered voters, just a couple million less than the entire state of Florida.
Okay, and now this was 1994 for the Senate seat that Michael Huffington and Dianne Feinstein were running for. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now here's the question: how much fraud did you find in that vote? Those 4 million registered voters.
Well, number one, we were never able to prove actual voter fraud. What we have uncovered, and both political parties at the highest level are acutely aware of it, what we did uncover was massive voter registration fraud. Because just because I know for a fact that you're registered 3 or 4 times, sometimes within the same day or in the same week, it's difficult without actually having your signature analyzed and comparing it with the absentee ballot, of which the jacket is thrown away readily after the count is done, to prove that you actually voted that many times. But the intent to commit voter fraud is easily represented by the data when you compare it with any off-the-shelf anti-fraud software that any of the credit card companies use to make sure that, you know, people aren't getting multiple credit cards, you know, at their same address or in, you know, just a name that was changed by 1 digit. This is pretty readily available. It's just that the counties don't have the money to do it, and that's rampant. See, the federal government said, all right, all this voting registration, we're going to leave it up to each individual state. And then the state washed their hands of it and said, look, all right, we're going to make it up to every individual county. So it's difficult because every county has their own way of setting up the data. That means you have to analyze it on a county-by-county basis. But it seems to me, with as close as this election is, and as many states are just being won by razor-thin margins on either side, I can guarantee my fellow Christian listeners out there that our next president, no matter who it is, will be elected by people that voted more than once.
Wow.
That's the bottom line.
How many people did you find registered more than one time with just I mean, I looked at some, we're not allowed to give any names out, but I looked at some of the records that you have, and it's amazing that a U will then become an R, and that's the difference in the name. In other words, everything else is correct. Their first name, their middle name, their birth date, their address is all correct. But maybe just like I looked at one, the difference was one was a U, one was an R, but they were registered twice. But we have no way of knowing whether they voted twice, though.
No, and it's going to require a court order to look at the signatures at the different polling places to see if that really happened. But one thing's for sure, they very, very deliberately registered within a short period of time. And
Mm-hmm.
also, there's a lot of innocent people that, and even good Christian, women that will get married. They'll be receiving a ballot um, in the mail under their maiden name. They'll
Mm-hmm.
get married,
Mm-hmm.
and innocently, maybe they'll register again under their new married name, and they'll get two ballots.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One
And
one could be an absentee ballot because they no longer live at the other
of
address,
course,
correct?
and then you have, a very pro-life candidate, coming up locally for mayor or something, and she's holding on, and she knows that maybe she's in two different precincts, and she's so adamantly opposed to abortion that she commits a knowing felony by voting twice because somebody has handed her both ballots and held that carrot out in front of her. But that
Mm.
holds true for both parties.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And that's where I ran into problems. That's why the federal judge that looked at this data, I was not called as a material witness to explain the methodology behind how we analyzed all 4.2 million names, because I was requested by the Huffington team to place the party affiliation of that voter on the printout.
Right.
And that was after they asked me the question whether I was a conservative or a liberal. And I looked the man in the eye and said, I'm an American. And to me, voter fraud is voter fraud. I don't care if these poor people, some of them are poor people, some of them are outright fraud artists, and some of them are registered 10 and 12 times. Registering nursing home registrants and getting absentee ballots being put to another address is also a very, very favored way of going about this. And nobody that I'm aware of in this entire country, in any county of this country, has ever taken, including Santa Barbara County, and you've just had a very close election between Stoker and Capps. Stoker lost by 1%.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody has taken the 220 some odd thousand people that voted and see how many times they voted. I guess nobody really cares.
Well, is the expense warranted out to find out? I mean, that's what we're doing in Florida. We are expending millions and millions and millions of dollars for these recounts. And because it's for the President of the United States, even though they know that even these chads that are, now they just want to see if there's a slight bubble to it, they want to get it counted. I mean, that seems worth it to them because it's just so it's just so slided to one place that they can actually work this. And so it's not as expensive, even though it's millions and millions of dollars. It's costing even the people who are running Vice President Gore and Governor Bush, both are appealing for money so they can keep this going. So isn't that the fact that they just don't have the money in this area to do something like what you did?
Well, if you pay absolute full retail for an analysis of credit card fraud, or take any particular mailing list and you want to analyze it, the full retail rate is up to about 10 cents a name, and depending on how much, like everything else, there's a quantity discount. And if you bring in millions of records that need to be analyzed, you can sometimes negotiate it down to as little as a penny a name. But I guess it's not worth spending a penny a name for a county to make sure that everybody's voting once. It's too expensive.
Are we going to go to this, Gary, that we'll be going to this, that every time it's a razor edge, we're going to go and recount? Do you feel that this is the way we're going to go, or can we clean it up long before that?
Like I said, at least since 1994, both parties at the highest levels are aware of how rampant our registration rolls are with Deadwood, and Motor Voter even exacerbated it.
Motor Voter?
Yeah, Motor Voter, where you're given a registration form when you renew your driver's license.
Oh, yeah,
referred
right.
to as
Exactly.
Motor Voter.
Sorry, yeah.
That just exacerbated it. And most of the counties, and not just L.A. County, but Santa Barbara County is way up there with it, and most of the other counties in the United States, and I have no idea Florida's methodology, but in L.A. County, you could very innocently go in and put in a change of address for your voter registration, fill out the form, and if you simply put a period after your middle initial on one and not put a period after your middle initial on the other, you're registered twice. You can vote twice if you choose to.
Do you think that, let's just get into the psychological effect, because obviously you're a data guy and you're looking at all kinds of data. If you received, because everybody receives a voter guide. Everybody who's registered receives a voter guide. So if you receive multiple voter guides,
You know you can vote multiple times.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you as a Christian, and I'm only speaking to Christians because a big part of our audience is Christian, have a moral standard that you can't do that. Even though even though the great scenario you gave, the greater need, we don't do
To
that as
stop
Christians.
abortion.
Right, we don't do that. We say, well, listen, we have to be right in our heart first before we can be right. But what you're saying, though, the need, if you do receive multiple voter guides, you're going to the temptation is just too great,
It's
especially
tremendous.
if you want your thing. Whatever it
Especially
may
if
be.
you want to protect the lives of children.
Yeah, that is one. I agree with you, Gary. That is one that even in my house would be difficult to not vote twice. I've never done that in my life. I never sought to do that. I have never thought about voter fraud until you actually walked in my door today. I never knew it was this rampant. I had no idea. I had a feeling there's a reason why all these Democrats and these Republicans have swarmed down to South Florida to make sure the vote is right, because they must know something we don't know. And obviously they must have some of the data that you have gotten, that you have in front of you. Now you have reams of names, and you also have a spool of information that you gathered yourself, right?
The actual mainframe record of the possible people committing voter fraud. Remember, all I can do is show registration fraud, and some of it was purely innocent. Like I said,
Sure.
you just eliminating a period after your middle initial, and you put in a change of address, so you move and you re-register, but your mail's forwarded for 6 months, so all of a sudden the old address without the period comes to you on forwarded mail, and your current registration with the period comes to you, and now you're looking at a candidate that's very pro-life and a candidate that's very pro-choice, and you're looking at your two ballots. And I'm faced at a little bit greater degree with the same moral dilemma. If Bush is elected in Florida by what looks like it's 432 some odd votes right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I know for a fact there's got to at least be 10 times that many of people that have voted fraudulently, do I really want to take the risk of getting Mr. Gore in as president by exposing the voter fraud and possibly solely be the one responsible for allowing Gore to get in when Bush may have gone in?
Yeah, but I think the greater moral thing upon Christians, and I'm glad you brought this up, I think the greater moral thing about Christians is we have to believe that God is God, and he will work out whatever needs to be worked out. Now, our prayer life and our own lives have to be there. We have to prayerfully consider everything and prayerfully pray for people who are elected, because kings are removed and brought in by God, and we have to believe that. Otherwise, we will have anarchy, will we not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but I don't think we gave this number out, and I want to make sure that we give this number out. Now, you looked at 4,200,000 registered voters in L.A.
Yes, sir. That's what the computers analyzed. But I must point out that we only went what's known as 3 levels deep looking for fraud. You can go 10 levels deep.
How much fraud did you come up? How many multiple names did you come up with?
About 240,000. But our system was sloppy. There's
But
a lot
just
of
think
those
about
that are
that.
absolutely, you analyze it and you can see that some of them are, absolutely innocent. All I know is they're registered twice, like the example I gave about the woman who gets married and she gets 2 ballots. And now, I'm not going to say that this woman is not upstanding enough if she's, pro-life enough not to use it, but it's a felony. And so pardon me, we had several strategy meetings with the Huffington group, and the idea that Huffington was going to use, and I can let my imagination go wild as to why nobody ever pursued this, because it could cause a constitutional crisis. If they really start analyzing the close states, not just Florida, for voter registration fraud, and I'll tell you what,
Even California. It's
even
close.
even Santa Barbara County,
Mm-hmm.
we've got a congressional race that just missed. I did speak to Mr. Stoker yesterday regarding this, and he was afraid, politically afraid, strategically right. He was. I'll say that. I can understand strategically why he didn't want to start screaming voter fraud. It seems that people are perceived as being the crybaby. They don't have the data. They don't understand what solid footing they're on. Everybody realizes that it's there, but Perot used to always make the analogy of, the crazy ant in the basement that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
But this particular crazy ant, maybe if these states are encouraged, and I wish I could, in good conscience, encourage your listeners to call Florida or at least call the Secretary of State and say, what are you doing? How do we know that our next president, whether it be Bush or Gore, comes out of that Florida election, was actually elected by people exercising their one person, one vote that's legal?
Right. Do you think, Gary, if you just joined us, I'm Jim Zimmer. This is a special broadcast of Christian Interviews today. We're talking about the election, and Gary Tomlinson, who has looked into voter fraud and voter registration fraud, is an expert at this. This is not somebody who just, he's got the information sitting right in front of us. So we do have somebody with credentials here. He's looked into it already once and found quite a bit of it. But what this all does, Gary, my question is this: will this help clean up things, or will we still have status quo? Would you think that all this, the culmination of what's going on in Florida right now, and in about 10 minutes, the Secretary of State will make her press conference, so we'll know where she stands here in just a few minutes. But do you think that this will help clean it up? And do you think more Gary Tomlinsons will be called in to help clean this up?
Actually, it's not a number of Gary Tomlinsons. It's just one bank of mainframes and the raw data from every county. I mean, the work to it, this is simple stuff. Credit card.
But do you think the end result, do you think of all this that's happening, do you think the end result we'll start cleaning up the voting?
Well, if you're registered twice or three times at a couple of addresses and you got a couple of absentee registrations at some other addresses or P.O. boxes, which are famous for being used, you rerun the election, why not take a chance and vote multiple times again? The only way to do it, and this is where the potential of a constitutional crisis comes in, is to go through, clean all the rolls clean, verify citizenship, verify address, verify legal voting age and
so
status.
Show your driver's license or show an identification.
And I would put in much bolder print the penalties for voter fraud, make it an issue where people understand that, yeah, for once, since we started using computers to keep track of voter registration, which has been a very long time, that somebody will be using off-the-shelf anti-fraud software to make sure that you are registered once. Not saying there isn't some very clever people, but not as rampant as it is now.
Okay.
And if you do that, you're going to have to rerun the entire election. And
yeah, but we don't want that.
One of the two parties, well, I'm going to edit myself on what I was going to say. It doesn't matter what party the fraud is taking place in. I know because I set up the program. But I would insist, because if you get a lot of people running around ready to prosecute some mother of three for, you got to offer them amnesty.
That's just how I say. We'll offer amnesty. Just clean up your act. I guess I believe
amnesty has to be offered because you need affidavits, just similar to the process they're going through in Florida. And if you don't think if Gore loses this thing, and it looks like he's going down to a few hundred votes. If you don't think that the Democrats are going to jump on this voter fraud, I just would like to have somebody objective look over their shoulder and just make sure that the data analysis is done properly. One party may stand to lose more than the other party, depending on which party has, committed the more flagrant and discoverable voter fraud.
My hope is that we will clean this up, Gary. I mean, my hope is someday that.
Say a prayer.
Yeah, well, I've been praying about it ever since last Tuesday. It's been on my prayer list for sure. I want the right man to win. I want God's man to win, and I believe that most people are honorable, except for there are the few who would do these things. But they're the type that's been ripping off welfare and ripping off everything else anyway. So there's a consequence to their sin. But my hope is that this will clean up a lot of I think this should be exposed. I think a lot of this should be exposed. This is what's really going on. If you go into L.A. County with 4.2 million registered voters and find nearly 7% of them, 7% of the registered, you only went three levels deep. You didn't even go to the real serious.
Yeah, well, that's why that 7% may be high, because I only went 3 levels deep. But I guarantee you that you've got at least, I would say hardcore, at least a minimum of 0.5 to 1% of hardcore people that have voted time after time
multiple times.
As long as they can go back. And anytime you have, and you know what hurts more than on the national level, and this is such an important election, and I'm sure that your listeners understand that this upcoming president will be appointing up to 3 Supreme Court justices. Mm-hmm. Those 3 are either going to be appointed by Gore or by Bush. And the election is so close. At the start of the show, you mentioned good versus evil. Well,
it almost seems like that. I mean, it just, way everything's going, it just seems like that.
I have a particular affinity for the yin-yang symbol, the representation of good and evil.
Right.
And with the margins of the Republicans being razor thin now in Congress and razor thin in the Senate, it seems to me this could be this nation's make or break point. We've got good and evil in absolute, almost perfect harmony, and it's going to either swing towards the right side, or that black is going to come around. And
wow, that I didn't look at it that way, but I think you're right, Gary. I think we are so close to that right now. And if you looked at the actual, what really was scary is if you looked at the United States map, only 20% of the land population voted for Gore. Nearly 80% of the land population, or the land mass, rather, of United States voted for Bush. That is incredible to think.
To watch some of the close election results. I mean, New Mexico now has got, less than 400 votes?
Yeah, it's about 400, yeah.
Once again, if I go into all of their county registration rolls and just send them through generic 4 or 5 level, analysis for potential fraud, I guarantee you I'll come up with at least 0.5 to 1%. That means that this next president is going to be solely elected by people that have voted more than once.
That's incredible to think. Well, folks, if you just joined us, this has been Christian Interviews Today. It's another special broadcast of Christian Interviews Today. We've been doing a lot of these during this voting time. My guest today has been Gary Tomlinson. Gary has been a distinguished man of the American Express Advocate Tech Group, which looked into fraud.
Advanced
Technology Group, excuse me, that looked into fraud for the American Express card. He's also helped with the looked into voter registration for the Feinstein-Michael Huffington election in 1994. A man who knows what he's talking about, and he's saying that no matter who gets elected, will definitely be elected basically by fraud.
The dark side.
No, yeah, it's incredible. Well, folks, keep your prayers going, keep things happening. Believe that God is truly on the throne and that good things will come of this election, and only time will tell. We'll know sooner or later who's going to be the President of the United States. I truly hope that Gary's wrong, that it will not be elected by fraud, but it will truly be put in there by God. Well, this is Jim Zimmer for Christian Interviews Today. Thank you so much, Gary, for dropping by. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Okay, you've been listening to, like I said, a special broadcast of Christian Interviews today. Regular broadcasting will continue after this with R.C. Sproul and Renewing Your Mind. Maybe that's what we need, is a little renewing of our hearts and minds. God bless you. Goodbye, and I'll see you next time on the radio.
God bless.
Well, I felt a little post-show commentary was appropriate here. It drove me nuts back in the year 2000 that I could not accomplish cleaning up the voter registration records and methodology. Now, one can only speculate in hindsight. Of course, our hindsight is always 2020. What would have happened if we did analyze all of the close states and determined that the hundreds of people that were counted as winning the election for Bush were disqualified because the total number did not pass the expected error rate. By error rate, I mean the 0.5 to 1.5% of people knowingly, repeatedly voting more than once. We would have had to have rerun the election. In Florida, Ralph Nader got about 91,000 votes. If Bush and Gore were to rerun the election just in Florida, or maybe New Mexico as well, those Nader votes would have went to Gore. Bush may not have been elected. If Bush had not been elected, would Gore have got us involved in Iraq after 9/11? Remember, 9/11 was still a year away. This was pre-9/11. Bush was in power and had a personal grudge against Saddam Hussein for dissing his papa, his daddy Bush. If Gore were elected president on a cleaned up voter registration recount, and if he were president when the planes hit the towers, do you really think we would have ended up in Iraq, the Middle East, and have ISIS all over the world right now? This is what some of the New Age people call karma. We, as an American people, have an obligation to clean up our voter registration and our voting methodologies. If you don't clean it up, there sometimes is hard karma to pay. Bush being elected pre-9/11 may have, please let me emphasize, may have been the karma of getting us involved in Iraq, which collapsed the entire Middle East. And now we have terrorists attacking and killing dozens of innocent people all over the place because of policies created by Bush. And remember, it was an almost unanimous vote between the Democrats and the Republicans to take us into Iraq. I don't think there's many people around now that say it was a good idea and a positive outcome getting involved in Iraq. This is what you risk by not cleaning up the voter registration and voting count process. It was a mess back in the year 2000. They have made some improvements, county by county, state by state. I worked for Secretary of State Bill Jones when I did that analysis. Periods, I think they've corrected that. Voter registrations now are not forwarded on mail. There's been a few improvements, but after my analysis, apparently it scared the crap out of both parties so much that they used privacy laws and made sure that an independent consultant could not analyze the raw data any longer. Nobody's looked at the data. Nobody can look at the data. Does anybody think this is a good idea? I know my voice is dripping with sarcasm. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say. I thought I could get it cleaned up. I thought that when Arlen Specter offered me the chairmanship of the Voter Reform Committee that I had a chance. No, neither party wants to clean it up. And let me give it to you in a nutshell. Why? Because each party on a county by county and then state by state level think that they can cheat better than the other party. And this affects the local level far more than it does the national. If you have just a few dozen people, you can stack a school board. You can put your own mayor in, your own county commissioners. Voter fraud at a very local level is far more devastating. Voter registration fraud is far more devastating than on the national. But national and local, yeah, it's just as bad, if not worse, than it was in the year 2000. Except now, there isn't anybody that can do an independent analysis because of the privacy blanket that they threw over the whole shebang. All right, I'll shut up. Sorry about taking so long, and I'm also need to apologize for the volume levels jumping around. You know, I have my volume levels straight. They're accurate. And then when I upload them to YouTube, the gremlins get in there and all of a sudden the audio levels are bouncing all over hell and back. All right, I'm shutting up. Hope you enjoyed it. Comment, let me know what you think. Bye-bye.